Doña Lucrecia. One night, Doña Lucrecia came to visit. She belonged to a group of healers that lived in another village. In the middle of the conversation, she started telling us about the war of the sorcerers and how I was the result of it. I immediately became curious and wanted to know the details, but noticed Don Melcher giving Doña Lucrecia an imperceptible sign to be silent. She changed the subject with natural ease. Doña Lucrecia fitted the classic description of a witch. Her face was fearsome, cross-eyed. She also had a wart on her nose, and some of her teeth were missing. The other assistants had warned me about her, saying that she was crazy and very eccentric. One of the oddities they commented on was that she habitually went to every funeral in her village, and sometimes even to internments in nearby towns. When asked why she did it, she explained that she had had the ability to speak with the dead since childhood, and she liked to chat with them while they were still fresh. One of the assistants asked why she bothered with the dead. And why shouldn't I? Doña Lucrecia replied with a menacing air. Because the living are more important? The discarnate ones have a great potential to prolong the continuation of their awareness in the other world, just like us. Unfortunately, just like the everyday world clouds our awareness, they are weighed down by memories of their experiences. When the dead are told of their chances, they ignore the advice, entangled in their memories, and are gradually consumed until nothing is left. I have helped hundreds find their way to the light. Most of them are like headless chicken when they first arrive, lost and confused. Nothing makes sense to them. Some arrive badly and don't even know who they were or where they came from. Others set off in search of their fantasies straight away. What fantasies do you mean? We asked. She replied, when people die, they sometimes have a hard time letting go of the world of the living and will always cling to things. They're full of ideas and fantasies of what is or what should be on the other side. So, when they get there, that is exactly what they find. People who die see what they expect to find on the other side. Seers who visit that place see them as they really are, paralyzed, staring into nothingness. Doña Lucrecia said that in that place, multitudes of awareness remained as motionless as zombies. Seers say that they are reliving their memories, recounting their experiences for one last time. They claim that this is what it is like when they are in the process of being consumed by the eagle. That night, Doña Lucrecia told us about one of her terrible encounters with the dead. She said that many of them returned, if they could, and interfered in the everyday world of the living. She told us the story of a young man killed in a motorcycle accident. He had loved a girl madly. When I was at the funeral, she said, I saw the young man wandering among the mourners. He was still wearing his black leather jacket. Nobody else saw him, but I noticed that whenever he approached someone, that person would become uncomfortable and move away. I watched him for a while. When the young man noticed I could see him, he came over to talk to me. For a moment, I pretended not to hear, but then found a more secluded spot and asked him what it was he wanted. He begged me to contact his girlfriend and tell her he loved her. I was vexed and said that even death hadn't rid him of his foolishness. We talked for a long time and became friends. I then began telling him about sorcerers and how they use their knowledge to continue their existence on another level of awareness. I spent several years with him, teaching him what was necessary for increasing his survival chances on his journey through the cruel world out there on the other side. One of the women inquired about Anita, and Doña Lucrecia told her that she was fine and still increasing her abilities. We wanted to know who Anita was. Doña Lucrecia replied that it was her little girl, her daughter, but not one that had come out of her womb, she explained. I found her at a wake, and it surprised me that she, too, could see the departed. As I talked to her, I could see that she was gifted. Her perception was very fluid. I asked her if she needed help, since she appeared to be lost. The little girl told me she'd left her home following a spirit, and had ended up in that place. It is very common for evil spirits to entice children away in order to hurt them or even kill them. But fortunately, this time, it had not been the case. She told me her name was Anita. I asked if she knew her way home. The little one lowered her head and shrugged her shoulders as if to say, "Who knows?" or "Who cares?" I took her to my house that night, hoping to return her to her family the next day. I actually asked around town, but no one knew her or anything about her. I even went to the police, but they knew even less than the others. She now lives with me. I am helping her develop her skills, and she is becoming a very powerful little sorceress. On a more convenient occasion, curious, I asked Doña Lucrecia about the war of the sorcerers. She replied that if I visited her at home, she'd tell me everything. I never did. Of all Doña Silvia's colleagues, Doña Lucrecia was definitely the scariest. The tales of her misdeeds were legendary among the apprentices. They said she not only healed people, but also made them ill and even killed them. She described herself as helper. One night she told us how she helped a dying man with his transition. She said that the patient was suffering and that there was no hope whatsoever for him. So she prayed the death prayer, and death came looking for the man, finally ending his agony. In a fearful voice, one of the assistants asked about the prayer. Doña Lucrecia was reluctant at first, but then something changed her mind. She explained that the prayer was an ancient spell in her ancestral language. It was so dangerous that she could not even speak it as it was, but would change the word Miquitzli, meaning death, to Tecoloto, which translated as owl. She then intoned with great intensity. Ia Tecoloto, Zia Hualawa, Nikan se Ignopilitzin, Maamo Kokoliz, Manikan Mahanoso, Ye Askan Yes, Tla Sihiqui Nota Tlaka Tecoloto, Metalakohoyaya in Amoyo, in Ignopilitzintli. Amo Semikak Mama Kehwal, Nana Mama Tlapal, Maslitska Kwanya in Miklan, Tecoloto Zikakui. Hualua ye Axtan yes, Sikakui Nonotza, Mixlante Kuhuitli, Nehuatel, Ita Nohuati Huapili Imimetzli Pili, Nehuatel, Intetoya Talatoani, Nehuatel, Intaloke Kale, Nahuatel Nimitzlialalia, Zihualua, Manikan Manoso. In translation, that became, "Hey Al, you who inhabit the dark regions, come now. Take this poor suffering wretch. Don't let him pine. Come out and do your duty. Do not delay. Come now. Oh Al, come now. Have mercy on this unfortunate sufferer. There is no reason to keep him here. Carry him off on your wings. Take him to the dark kingdom. Hey Al, listen to what I say. Come then, do not delay. Listen to the one that calls you. O Al, I am the daughter of the sun and the moon. I am the one who speaks to the gods. I am the one at whose table spirits feast. I am the one commanding you. Come and perform your task." Doña Lucrecia warned us that this prayer was very powerful and was used not only to help the terminally ill die, but also with some variations which she would not reveal, to get rid of one's enemies. Jokingly, she said to one of the healers that if he did not visit her soon, as he'd promised, she would call upon death to come and get him. We all laughed nervously. In the course of another conversation, Doña Lucrecia said, like the wise virgins in the parable who got ready for the arrival of their Lord, healers prepare for the greatest of all events, the pending appointment we have with our death. To deal with death, she said, you have to reach an extreme state beyond attachment to this world. She stated that Saint Death was the only counselor who always told the truth, and that we could all perceive death if we focused our attention on her. She said that even ordinary people could sense her now and then. Doctors in hospitals usually know that a person is about to kick the bucket when he or she begins to see dead relatives and friends. That is normal. The proximity of death breaks their fixation on the quotidian, and even those less prepared can perceive the other world. Our ancestors symbolically represented the passage to the other world by placing a jade bead representing a replica of their lives into the mouths of their dead. Those who had no money to give to the hound of hell would have to cross the river of oblivion by themselves and would never manage to reach the other bank. Doña Lucrecia explained that this custom, based on the practice of sorcerers, served to remind the living that dying means sinking into the dark sea of awareness. To escape this fate, one must pay one's debt to the spirit. Our life experience is what we owe, and the payment consists in unraveling every feeling and every emotion we'd had in our lifetime. That can be achieved by means of an impeccable and thorough recapitulation. She said, instead of collectively remembering the dead one day a year, as ordinary people do, sorcerers evoke the day on which they are going to die. That day, which is as real as any other, is much more memorable than any other date one might celebrate. To flow with death means to become one with it. Learn to accept it in such a way that it becomes a friend, so that when the moment comes for us to set off for the valley of shadows, there will be no fear in us, because we'll know how to cross the river of oblivion. That is the only way to conquer death. Smiling wickedly, Doña Lucrecia glared at us with the eyes of the devil and said in a terrible voice, I've come to take you. We all laughed. The healers with total abandon, and the rest of us with total apprehension. Tales from the kitchen. At night, it was our custom to assemble around the wood stove in Doña Silvia's house to listen to stories, tell our dreams, relate our experiences, and discuss topics of interest for the apprentices. During the first phase of my stay among the healers, I believed them to be a sort of religious brotherhood. Later, I believed for a while that they were relatives. Still later, however, I discovered that they were much more than that. On one of those occasions, Don Melcher and two very strange old men came to visit us. In the light of the oil lamp, the visitors cast weird shadows. From where I sat, I was able to focus my attention on them. At first, the shadows appeared to flicker with the glow of the fire. But after a while, I noticed that they were moving differently from other shadows in the room. Everyone was concentrating on the conversation. I felt as if the shadows, realizing that I had noticed they were different, surged towards me threateningly. I let out a tremendous scream that interrupted the meeting. The assistants surrounded me, wanting to know what the matter was. Feeling that I was slowly returning to my senses, I apologized and told them I had been dreaming awake. They all laughed. After the meeting, I discussed what I had seen with some of my fellow assistants. It turned out that I had been the only one who had seen the two old men. When I questioned Don Melcher about it, he told me dryly that they were his allies. The first time Don Melcher took me to his house in the state of Veracruz, I was surprised to see how fine it was. It was in fact an enormous house of very good quality, completely opposite from what they had in the state of Morelos. I asked him about that, but he misinterpreted my questions, believing I wanted to know where he got the money for all that. He told me an extraordinary story. He said that an inorganic being visited him once, a ghost who told him that, while alive, he used to be a rich landowner's farmhand. One day his boss ordered him and his mate to drag a heavy trunk up to a very isolated area near a sharply pointed rock. The boss commanded them to dig a large hole, commanded them. Carefully lower the trunk down to the bottom and bury it. While they were in the middle of the task, the old man pulled out a gun and shot them, killing them both. The greedy rich man did not want witnesses. He said that the discarnate being told him that the old man, while covering their corpses with soil, had put a charm on them to make them guard his treasure to the end of time. The souls of the two laborers had been unable to free themselves of the enchantment ever since. They appeared to Don Melcher and told him the secret of the buried treasure in order to break the power of the spell, and thus escape their chore. Don Melcher went up to the place the troubled spirit had indicated and excavated the spot. Close to the surface, he found human bones, and then further down the already rotten trunk, full of gold doubloons. I had already heard similar stories and had never believed a word. This time, however, there was a physical proof of the claim, so I had to accept the story as true. At that time, to accept an idea like that was for me equivalent to accepting the existence of another world inhabited by the dead. My hair stood up and I tried to think of something else. To change the subject, I told Don Melcher that the purpose of my original question was to find out the reason behind the enormous discrepancy between his two lifestyles. With an expression of understanding, he laughed and replied that healers had to be very detached and fluid, and that the strategy of living a simple life in the mountains helped them stay that way. The humility of a king. Shortly after my arrival at the healer's house, Doña Silvia drew my attention to the fact that my hair was too long and that I was in need of a good trim. She offered to cut my hair. I looked at her suspiciously, but she explained with a serious expression that it was mostly she who gave the assistants their haircuts. I cherished my hair, which for me was an important element of my identity. To reassure myself, I asked her again if she was sure that she knew how to do the job. With a confident tone, she replied that she was an expert hairdresser. So, albeit with some apprehension, I let her cut my hair. As she worked on, I felt a snip, and I saw a large amount of hair fall to the ground. Doña Silvia let out a scream and told me that she had done something inconceivably clumsy. I ran to look at myself in a mirror, but then remembered that there were none in the house. In my despair, I looked into the rearview mirror of the disintegrating old truck that was being used as an improvised hen house. Seeing my reflection, I realized that Doña Silvia had cut off a massive tuft of my hair, literally leaving my scalp bare on the most visible part of my skull. That hugely upset me, but I saw no other remedy than to allow her to continue cutting until I was left completely bald. For me, being bald was like walking around naked. At first, I felt awful and unnatural with myself. But then the lesson took effect, and I understood how trivial it was to base my internal well-being on physical appearance. The stories healers told were generally intended to teach us how to treat diseases. Occasionally, however, they told local folk tales that always had a moral about the warrior's way and life in general. One night, Doña Silvia told us the story about the pyramid on the hilltop, clearly visible from the village. She explained that the ancients had built it to honor a king who had ruled those lands in the past. She said, at that time, the government was in the hands of seers and sages who served as beacons for the people. It was not like it is today, when any crook can grab power. But we'll talk about that some other day. Adopting the tone used by traditional storytellers, Doña Silvia began. They say that long ago there was a young virgin who was as beautiful within as she was of appearance. Her black hair was smooth and very long. Her eyes were dark and shiny. In her presence one could feel the fragrance of spring. The little birds sang to her in a chorus, and in her wake the flowers opened and exhaled their perfumes. Doña Silvia pointed to a south-facing window and said, she lived in one of the glens in that direction. Her name was Chimali. It happened that on one occasion the beautiful girl went to fetch water from the river not too far away from her village. She took a shortcut straight through the woods, and there she met the spirit of the forest. Praising her beauty and the sweet look in her eyes, the spirit gave her an obsidian pebble and said it would bring her good luck. Then the spirit disappeared and she went on. Having filled her jug with clear water, she made her way back home. She kept the pebble she got from the forest spirit in her mouth under her tongue. But it so happened that in an unguarded moment, she swallowed the pebble. As time went by, she realized that the stone had been enchanted since she had become pregnant. The wise rulers of her village saw Chimali's aura and realized that she was telling the truth and that her pregnancy had been brought about by the spirit. They took that as an omen. In due time, Chimali gave birth to a son who became the king of his people. Tiposteco was his name, and he was a king so wise that his fame spread way beyond the frontiers of his land. From everywhere, people came to hear his words. The story tells that on one occasion the great king was invited to a banquet at the royal court of Tenochtitlan, which was located where Mexico City is today. He arrived dressed in his usual way, wearing his humble loincloth and leather sandals, but he was not allowed in. He then returned home and put on fine clothes, gold, jewels, and precious feathers. Thus attired, he returned to the party. This time he was admitted in and seated alongside the other nobles. During the meal, out of the blue, and to everyone's astonishment, King Teposteco began smearing food on his clothes and ornaments. When asked why he was doing it, he replied that it was not he who had been invited to the banquet, but his clothes and jewelry. The others were profoundly embarrassed. The lesson of this story is that we must look beyond appearances. Unlike this baldy here, Doña Silvia said, pointing at me, who believes that only external appearances matter. Modern man has abandoned his good sense in favor of vanity. He has become a puppet of fashion and behaves like a clown, only without even the slightest sense of the ridiculous. It clearly shows how people continue to follow the propaganda blindly without ever questioning anything, and are thus mercilessly manipulated by hidden forces. The price for emphasizing any aspect of the ego is to remain locked up in the chosen detail. Lack of awareness makes the masses behave mechanically and follow stereotypes. Watching them, one doesn't know whether to laugh or cry. Patients' stories. Patients past and present were the reoccurring subject of our night conversations. The healers would very casually discuss the patient's illnesses, how their afflictions were relieved, and what healing methods had been used in each case, so that the audience not only listened to the story, but always learned something about the practice of healing. Each story was indeed a lesson, and not just about the healing. This is the case of a lady called Doña Mariana, who came seeking help for infertility. She had been married for 5 years, but had not yet managed to have children. After careful examination, it became clear that the woman's ovarian ducts were almost completely closed because of a psychological trauma she had suffered when, as a girl of barely 10, she got raped by her own father. The healer subjected her to deep regression therapy of the event, and even then, it took many sessions for her to fully remember what had taken place. Doña Mariana finally freed her feelings and recalled in detail the misdeed of which she had been victim. According to her, her father had been drunk at the time. On such occasions, they would have terrible fights at home, usually ending in physical aggression against their mother or some other family member. She related how, on that unfortunate night, seeing that her father was drunk, she took him to the shed at the back of the house where they lived, in the hope of avoiding the usual confrontations. She wanted to put him to sleep there and then go back to her chores in the kitchen, but her father forced her to stay and lie down with him. At first, she did not know what he was doing and thought he was playing with her. On feeling the pain, however, she entered a profound state of terror and closed her entire being up. The denial resulted in progressive amnesia and caused an energy blockage in her reproductive system that eventually led to the near closing of her fallopian tubes and her sterility. It was only through extensive recapitulation, together with the manipulation of her physical body by massage and medicinal teas, that her ovaries recovered. She now has 2 healthy children and is very happy. This case makes it demonstrably clear that the recapitulation technique is not just warriors' work. It is also useful for ordinary people to recapitulate the events of their life. Recapitulation brings many advantages, from improving memory to enhancing self-awareness and awareness of the environment. It can get to the bottom of the energy attacks one may suffer and recover whatever energy has been snatched away. Sexual abuse of children is actually responsible for a great many diseases and psychological deviations in adults. The only thing one can do about this problem is struggle to raise the educational level of the population so that they can take responsibility for their actions and thereby break the chain that has existed for millennia, that of an abused child inevitably growing up to become an abusing adult. Mr. Salas's Attacks. Another interesting case that I have documented in my notes is that of a gentleman called Mr. Salas, who used to suffer constant attacks of irrational fear. The doctors had diagnosed profound schizophrenia, which was why he was on powerful drugs all the time. When his relatives brought him to Doña Silvia, the first thing she did was discontinue his medication. It took many sessions to achieve that, because part of him refused to open up to a treatment using only tea and roots. In addition, he underwent deep recapitulation therapy, which revealed that he had committed various crimes against the people of his village. He claimed that he was haunted by the spirits of those who he had killed, so much so that he suffered from severe seizures and loss of consciousness, soiling himself with his own excrement. Doctors did not know the cause of his illness, and consequently stuffed him full of psychotropic pills that did nothing other than keep him in an almost vegetable state. Doña Silvia explained that healer-seers perceive the human energy field, which is why, rather than being distracted by surface manifestations of the problem, they focus their attention on the balance and the functioning of the energetic organic union. That enables them to cure the problem at its root. Unable to find any organic or energy cause for that man's suffering, the healers had to focus their attention in another direction. They went to the other world to negotiate with the spirits that were tormenting Mr. Salas, since no other treatment had worked in his case. It turned out that the spirits were not willing to forgive. They found strength in hating their attacker, but did not understand, however, that under those circumstances, they too had no peace and that their existence was constant torment. The sorcerers had to explain to them the reality of their discarnate condition and the possibilities of advancement towards a higher level of awareness that that realm offered. They finally agreed to leave Mr. Salas alone when it was explained to them that he would die soon, and that without the knowledge and the discipline required, he would merge with darkness and oblivion, and that would be his eternal punishment. The spirits, nevertheless, insisted that Mr. Salas be beaten for 20 days in a row, and then, if he survived, they would leave him alone. This was done with the consent of his family. Every day for 3 weeks, he was given a tremendous beating that left him barely alive, only to have to endure the same thing the following day. Mr. Salas survived the punishment, and the spirits let him be. But his guilty conscience never allowed him to have a completely normal life. There is a saying among healers: until you have paid off your debts, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. To them, it means that one can only enter the other world if one has recovered the energy that has been scattered around. One achieves this by recapitulating one's life in all its detail. The Energy Parasite. On one occasion, Father Gratian, the parish priest of a nearby town, brought a rich and well-educated foreign woman who suffered from sudden fainting attacks for us to cure. The lady said that she had no faith in indigenous healers, but that she had been to see the best specialists there were, and not one could explain what was happening or what was wrong with her. She had agreed to come to us as a last resort. Her arrival caused great excitement because everyone wanted to see her. I was also curious, but as I was very new to the healer's art at the time, I did not notice anything special when I observed the lady. Doña Silvia told me later that what had so shocked them all was that this woman carried a pegoste clinging onto her energy. A pegoste would probably have been described as a baby flyer in Carlos's terminology. The seers perceived it as a dark spot clutching the lady's right side and consuming the poor woman's energy in such a way that it was killing her. It would only wait for her to recover slightly before attacking again. That was what was causing her fainting spells. It took a full cure of cleansing with plants and smoke, during which she was kept in quarantine before the lady was finally rid of the clinging parasite. The patient was delighted both by the healing process and the results obtained. She wanted to pay money for the services, but Doña Silvia would not accept payment. Instead, she told the lady that if she really wanted to show her gratitude, it would be better if she made a donation to Father Gratian's church, which looked after many orphans. And that was what the lady did. The ball player. It all began when one of the patients came to us with a rumor that a villager had been unjustly imprisoned by the Mexican police. We all took a dim view of the news because of the tremendous corruption prevalent among the officers. Rather than being guardians of the law, they were a sort of mafia using weapons to keep everyone hostage and impose themselves on them. The incident had sparked the fury of the people, culminating in an uprising in which people confronted the government forces. Later that night, as we commented on the events, Doña Silvia told us a story that became one of my favorites. It was about a Nahual of our lineage whose name was Xolotl. In ancient times, she began, adopting her usual storytelling tone, long before the arrival of the foreign devils, a confrontation with the Aztec army took place in this very village. It seems that history tends to repeat itself forever, doesn't it? She added with irony in her voice. Such confrontations were called Xochitl, or flower wars. At that time, everyone agreed that human sacrifices were needed to appease the wrath of the gods. So wars were conducted regularly with the collective consent of the people. The concept of flower wars is not understood by scholars to this very day, and will never be understood unless they let go of their self-important habit of interpreting the culture of a people on the basis of what they know of other cultures. I said that I'd read something about those military tournaments that aimed at capturing enemies in order to sacrifice them. But Doña Silvia, with a commanding gesture of her hand, told me to shut up because I knew nothing of the matter. To understand their particular way of seeing the world, you must first imagine the intimate relationship these people had with their gods. They lived in constant and close contact with powerful entities that definitely interfered with their lives. That was the era of sorcerer rulers who acted as a bridge between the world of daily affairs and the other world. To secure their power, they made agreements with invisible forces that became their gods. Those beings demanded blood sacrifices and other strange things that are now meaningless. The hallmark of those ancient warriors was the extreme faith they had in their beliefs. For them, war was a sacred activity. They used it not only to dominate, but also as a path for spiritual work, which they considered to be preparation for the encounter with the other side. It was an honor for those warriors to sacrifice their lives for the benefit of others. They believed that those who died in battle were immediately invited to sit at the table of the gods. By all accounts, it was the custom to choose the defeated and those captured in battle to be offered in sacrifice, because it was widely believed that the gods always coveted the blood of brave warriors above all else. It so happened that Xolotl, who belonged to the Ocelot Brotherhood of Warriors, got captured during one of those skirmishes, but not before he had fought so bravely that he had even won the admiration of his enemies. He was then taken with other prisoners to the great Tenochtitlan to be offered as sacrifice to god Tlaloc to help prayers for rain. In those days, the drought was very severe, and according to custom, gifts of blood were required to gain the ear of the powers that governed rain. The captives walked for many hours under the blazing summer sun, which cast its rays down at them like arrows of fire. Finally, they reached the cool shadow of the Great Pyramid, a delicious break for the bare, scorched skin of the prisoners. Doña Silvia explained that in the case of Xolotl, a slight alteration of the normal procedure took place. Instead of sacrificing him at once, as was the custom, the priests argued that, having had fought so bravely, he deserved a reward. The masters of the pyramid gave him the chance to play one last ball game, promising that he would be released if he won. Ulama was a pre-Hispanic ball game. now almost extinct, which used two stone hoops with round holes in their middle, each of them attached vertically at the height of about 4 meters to parallel walls, which were 20 meters apart from each other. The playing field was about 50 meters long, resembling an alley between the high walls on either side, each of them with a stone ring embedded at halfway point. The ball was a sphere of solid rubber, weighing more than 3 kilograms. According to the rules, players could not use their hands or feet to hit the ball, and were only allowed to use body parts such as knees, elbows, and particularly hips. The purpose was to keep the ball moving and put it through the opponent's ring. Continuing with the story in her theatrical manner, Doña Silvia said, "On the day of the game, the stadium was full to bursting, and the spectators shouted and applauded their favorite players. The pandemonium was only silenced when the sound of the ceremonial drums announced that the game had begun. Soloto played the game for his life and won. But the judges, the very same priests who had planned to execute him, did not accept his victory and falsely quoted certain rules. The death ceremony scheduled for the next full moon was drawing closer, and at that point, Soloto decided to run away, breaking with all the codes of honor of an Ocelot warrior. But he had good reason to do so, or so he thought. When, after 1,000 adventures, he got to his village, 1,000 adventures, he got to his village, his brothers rejected him. They beat and stoned him because they did not want a coward among them. Almost dead, Soloto fled again. This time he would hide in the caves he knew were the abode of the dreaded Nawals. He thought he would feel safe there, since no one else in their right mind would go to those cursed lands. As if in a dream, he knew he was close to the caves because of severed heads impaled on poles and other grisly fetishes that could be seen everywhere along the road. Everything looked like a hallucination to Soloto, who was bleeding profusely from the wounds inflicted by his captors and by his former comrades. A few steps on, he lost his senses and only recovered when he felt his body being manipulated by a dark man, almost black, with evil markings. Soloto saw that the man was chewing leaves and putting them on his wounds. What struck him most were the man's eyes, the brightest he had ever seen. Soloto's appearance was taken as an omen by the sorcerers of the caves, for they had immediately seen that this warrior who came to die at the entrance of the cave of the Nawals was a double being. Needless to say, those sorcerers healed his wounds and adopted him as one of their own. That was how he became the Nawal Soloto, one of the greatest healers of that period. Many stories are told of this Nawal, who was one of the most memorable Nawals of our lineage. The legend of the warrior in love. One of the assistants was in love with a girl from the city and was very troubled. He had reached the crossroads where he had to choose between the family life and the way of the healers. Doña Silvia took the opportunity to instruct us with one of her stories. In the evening, she asked Don Melcher to tell us the true story of Popo and Ixta. He began in the storyteller's manner, just like Doña Silvia. The story of the warrior and his beloved is well known in Mexican culture. It is immortalized in the form of Popocatépetl and Ixtlaquihuatl, two huge volcanoes that are visible even from Mexico City on a clear day. What is less well known, however, is the interpretation we, the healers, give to this legend, said Don Melcher with a malicious expression, moving his eyebrows up and down in undulating fashion. His buffoonery gave a great boost to the assistant's interest in his story. Moments like that make one appreciate the flair with which sorcerers adapt any situation to their purpose. Don Melcher went on. This story goes back to antiquity. They say it goes back to Amica, as that town was called in those days. Today it is called Amica Mica, or the other Amica, because the new town was built on top of the previous one after it was destroyed by a volcanic eruption. In those days before the eruption, when people still called it Amica, there lived in that area a great healer who had close contact with the spirit of the mountain. They say that the sorcerer had made an agreement with the entity of the mountain, and as planned, gave light, so to speak, to a virgin inside a cave. There it is said, the spirit of the mountain took possession of her newborn baby, and thus emerged with the warrior Popocatépetl. Many tales are told of the adventures of that warrior. The best known one is that of his love for a beautiful princess of an enemy people, love that was obviously impossible. According to popular history, the lovers decided to elope together and fled, but were pursued. Having no other choice, they climbed to the top of the mountain and threw themselves into the void. But they never touched the ground. They became two birds and flew away together towards the horizon. The healer's version, however, says that Popocatépetl was fathered by a great healer, and according to their story, wanted to follow in his father's footsteps. He had felt the healer's vocation since childhood, and had in fact faithfully followed all the steps on the warrior's path. He was about to become a sorcerer like his father, but as fate would have it, Popo went to the town's annual festival, where he met the lovely Itzlacahuatl, for whom he instantly developed an ardent passion. The young lovers forgot the world and gave themselves over to their love. As they both lived in that area, they wandered together through beautiful forests surrounding the mountains. Stories past and present tell of how dangerous certain places are in those mountains. Old people say that no one should climb up to or enter the caves there, for they are the abode of spirits. Legend has it that during one of their strolls, the young couple went to the mountains and got lured away by the spirits that inhabited the place. That day the lovers climbed the steep slopes and were never heard of again. Some believe they met an ordinary death in the ravines or were lost in the maze of caves. Others believe they passed into the other world through an opening that from time to time naturally appears in the area. The point is that this story shows how easy it is to stray from the path. It is very easy indeed to give in to your feelings and be engulfed by the everyday world. To be a warrior, one must have unbending intent. As he spoke the words, Don Melcher stared at the fellow who was suffering because of the same problem. The man lowered his head to escape his withering look. After a moment of awkward silence, Don Melcher continued. Well, and as for the lovers who had entered the cave and tried to make the crossing, they might even have made it. But that maneuver requires even more energy, since it involves leaping from our world to the other world cold. To put it this way, without proper preparation, that kind of leap usually means death. One of the assistants asked if it was true that there were or still are places like that. Don Melcher retorted, Well, look here at little Godfather Manuel. He's already been in the wolf's mouth, but has managed to return intact. Isn't it true, Godfather? It is true, Godfather, Don Manuel replied. Many years ago, in my youth, I went to those caves with two companions. We camped at that location and waited for 3 days until the wolf's mouth opened. That is what we call the door to the other world. It was midnight, and we believed ourselves sufficiently trained, but upon entering, each of us was sucked into the void. I managed to escape at the last moment because I realized that I would not survive the test, and gathering all my strength, jumped backwards. But my two companions who had entered ahead of me were lost. We never found out if they managed to survive, or if they disintegrated under the tremendous pressure. My benefactor was furious because of our audacity and disobedience. Shaking his head, Don Manuel concluded, "There are also those who believe that the secret to passing through that doorway lies in the love shared by a couple, and only as a couple is it possible to pass through to the other world, as was the case with Popo and Ixta." The Tale of the Poet King. Among the kings of ancient Tenochtitlan, there was one who personified poetry itself. His name was Nezahualcoyotl, and he raised greatly the level of culture among his people. During his rule, great spiritual and material advances were made. Temples and aqueducts were built, the streets were paved, and a general state of well-being prevailed, created by trade between cities. They say that as king, Nezahualcoyotl was a great conqueror, and not only of his enemies in battle, but also of the spirit. He constantly sought the path of illumination and evolution. In Doña Silvia's kitchen of an evening, it was customary to recite some of Nezahualcoyotl's poems. They would first be spoken in their original language, then repeated in Spanish for those who did not understand the language of the ancients. It was made clear, however, that although one could translate the words, the real feeling was inevitably lost. This is one of my favorites. Cuicatl añolque, Xochitl anquapeconque, ante pijalaihuan, di Zacatimaltzatzin in Dochihiwatzin, ompaye huitzi zomichicatl, atocnihuan tla zoconacacuican, in itlatol temicli, zozopandla tequepmitia, in tihuacatol zilotl tecani tuitia, tolaque chilatoltu, tecanoconquitia in ticmatii, ontla nelatoca toyolo tocni Juan. How wonderful it was to hear the voice and partake in the knowledge of those who had left long ago. It was as if they were speaking from distant past, directly to our ears. The translation of those wise words went as follows. What a song I have lived. What a flower I have brought to bud, O princess. I am Tokihuitzin, the wreath maker. Here is my chain of flowers. Friends, favor me and hear this word woven dream. In the spring, the sweet corn's golden sprout gives us life. The flame-colored cob refreshes us. How rich it is, this necklace of knowledge. How faithful to us the hearts of our friends. We were very pleased to hear the poems and discuss their deeper meaning in such a way that we were able to draw important lessons from each. In fact, I became so fond of the inspired words of the poet king that I collected virtually all of his available texts. While doing that, I unwittingly got into the idiom of the ancients, and thus, with pleasure and almost without effort, I managed to learn the language of our ancestors. I had been granted the honor of preparing a recital for one of our poetry evenings and performing it. To the surprise of the elders, I did it in their own language. At the end, they smiled happily and applauded me. I remember reciting this beautiful poem on that occasion. Quin ak talamati noyolo, nikaqui in cuicatl nisita in xochitl, maca in cuatlahua in tlaticpac, ni huanti ni chocha, nikniotlamati, nikmati niquito, niquelnamiki, maca aik namiki, maca aik nipoli huil, inken amikohua, inken ante petihua, in maonkan nihua, maca aik nimiki, maca aik nipoli hui. Here is the translation. At last I understand. I hear a song. I see a flower. Oh, may they never wilt. I feel out of myself. I weep, grieve, and ponder. Say and remember. Oh, if I were never to die, never to disappear. Go where death is not, where victory is mine. Thither I should go. Oh, if I were never to die, never to disappear. That night we went to bed with the taste of rich hot atole, and with those sweet words it seemed as if, in some magical way, the poems prepared us to enter dreaming. Part 3. The Lessons of the Healers. The Encounter in the Crypt. This book tells of what happened to me after I became involved with a group of healers and practitioners of sorcery. I don't aim to describe everyday events here, but rather provide a selection of facts and extraordinary moments when I learned or experienced something special. My first contact with this magical world was through Carlos himself, who set up a trap for me and indirectly introduced me to this sorcery tradition. I remember that on that occasion, before leaving me alone in the Metropolitan Cathedral of the Assumption in Mexico City, Carlos told me that I had to go down to the catacombs and stand with my eyes closed in the middle of a circle carved on the floor, facing southeast. I was initially worried about orienting myself underneath the church, but I saw that the circular drawing was marked with the 4 cardinal points. I did what Carlos had told me, and after having stood there for a while with my eyes closed, I had the strange feeling that someone was watching me. I opened my eyes just in time to see a man in native garb hiding in the crypt at the end of the corridor. I walked over apprehensively, only to find out that there was no one there. I was very frightened and classified that episode as when I saw a ghost, or at least that was what I believed for a long time. Once, after I had already known him for quite some time, Don Melcher and I went together on a trip to the nearby mountains, and on that occasion, I took the opportunity of asking him a question that had been preying on my mind. From the first moment I saw Don Melcher, I had the distinct impression that he had been the ghost I had seen in the crypt years earlier. I wanted to question him about it for a long time, but every time something I could not explain prevented me from doing it. I thought it was my timidity or the respect I had for him. That day, however, I mustered my courage and asked, "Were you the ghost I saw in the crypt in the Cathedral of Mexico?" On hearing my question, he laughed with malice and asked me what I was on about. I told him what had happened that day and added that he looked extremely like the ghost I had seen. He burst out laughing again, as if he could not believe what I said. "Were you really the ghost?" I repeated. "Nando," he sometimes called me by that pet name. "Bear in mind that you and I have known each other for a very long time. You don't remember because our meeting took place in the other world." I did not understand his allegation. My mind was firmly set on the question of whether or not he had been the ghost. But was it you or was it not? Don Melcher told me that the day Carlos introduced us in the crypt, the three of us had a long conversation. He went on to describe what happened, and the strange thing was that as he spoke, I recovered the memory of my experience. It was as if his words were a torch lighting up the memories that had been shrouded by darkness till that moment. Thus, with his help, I remembered that on that day, Carlos had told me to go down to the crypt. After I had been there for some time, I saw Carlos and an indigenous-looking gentleman approaching. I exclaimed, "Carlos, I thought you'd gone." Laughing, Carlos patted me on the back, pointing at the gentleman, and said that on his way out, he'd met a friend and wanted to introduce us. He said his friend's name was Don Pablo, and that he was a great sorcerer. I greeted Don Pablo and told him my name. He hugged me affectionately. I know that now, but I spent years with no memory of what happened that day. As he hugged me, Don Pablo unexpectedly gave me a tremendous grip. I felt as if he was squeezing me or pulling me by the top of my head. As I think of it now, the image that comes to me is of toothpaste being squeezed out of a tube. I was sliding up. I felt I was losing consciousness. Then, as I gradually became aware of myself again, I noticed that something in me had been changed. As if in a dream, I could see Carlos and Don Pablo laughing. I knew I was in a different state of awareness because everything had an unusual glow. For a brief moment, I perceived a web of light superimposed upon everything. That was the first time I had such an experience. But rather than being surprised, I felt joy, as if all that was already familiar to me. While in that state, I noticed otherworld entities roaming around. I remembered that on that day we actually interacted for a long time. Don Pablo gave me advice on how I should behave in life. He also recommended that I take certain teas to purify myself. When we had finished talking, Carlos told me to stand in the circle with my eyes closed and let the power of that place return me to everyday awareness. I did, and I felt as if I were waking from a dream. Then, next thing I knew was a feeling that someone was watching me. Remembering my meeting with Don Pablo that day put me in a state of euphoria, similar to drunkenness, and I spontaneously entered another level of perception. Don Melcher took the opportunity to give me new lessons, which then became erased from my normal memory, leaving me with a strange feeling that I had lost something. When I finally returned to my old self, we were already on the hilltop, and I could not remember how we got there.